With every great gaming franchise comes an interesting origin story, where developers bring to life fresh, innovative, and sometimes risky concepts that attempt to push the medium further and engage players in new ways. While some franchises strike gold immediately, others need time to fully realize the potential of their ideas, slowly developing their identity over the years as designers hone in on what's most enjoyable for their audience. The Megaten franchise is just that. Born out of a novel by the name Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, the first couple of games were interesting yet rocky attempts to emulate the demon summoning action found within its pages. Gradually, entries in the series began to take on a life of their own, separate from the books they were based on, to the point that today, the franchise is so distinct from its origins that they may be unrecognizable to newer fans of the series. Something about this interested me, and a little over a year ago, I decided to immerse myself in the beginnings of the Megami Tensei series, carefully examining the books, anime, and games that started it all, and then creating a video giving an overview of each. I wanted a fresh, complete reflection on everything to be available to the community, in hopes that other fans would similarly venture forth and see it for themselves. I like to think I did a pretty good job overall, but looking back, there were a few things I wish I had covered in more detail. My discussion of the very first Megami Tensei game published by Telenet Japan in 1987 for MSX computers, for example, gave a brief look at the main mechanics and my impressions thereof, but it mostly stopped there, and I spent much more time discussing the Atlus-produced Famicom dungeon crawler released in the same year that more people are familiar with. Many of you also commented about Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei, a game I only mentioned in passing during my initial review. Released for the Super Famicom in 1995, Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei is actually a remake of two games on the same cartridge. One is a remake of Atlus's original Megami Tensei game, and the other is a remade version of its sequel that received additional plot connections to the first. This would have been a nice inclusion for the original video, but for some reason or another I ended up not including it. Fortunately, today we're going to give each of these titles the attention they deserve, with the first half of the video focusing on Telenet Megami Tensei, and the latter half focusing on Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei. Consider this a sort of extended bonus feature to the original video. So, with that out of the way, Telenet Megami Tensei. All I really said about this one was that it felt clunky and repetitive to play, and that the experience wasn't worth much beyond the novelty of seeing just how different its arcade-style gameplay is from almost every other game to follow it. After about 20 minutes, the coolness factor on this game runs out, and then you're just playing a clumsy Gauntlet clone. For a long time afterward, I considered Telenet Megami Tensei little more than a neat trivia fact, and I never considered the possibility of actually playing it to completion. Whether it be through loss of sanity, morbid curiosity, an intense thirst for self-punishment, or maybe a mixture of the three, I recently decided to go back and see if I could push myself to the end of this game. Even if my first impressions weren't great, the picture I started painting a year ago just wasn't complete yet, and I wasn't content with leaving that shit unfinished forever. I wanted to revisit the game in hopes of uncovering additional depth that I had glossed over, and I was really interested in seeing how it adapted the titular Digital Devil story compared to its far more successful Atlus counterpart. Considering its obscure, unpopular, and untranslated nature, guides or other discussion to frame our little adventure with weren't going to be an option, aside from a game manual that was scanned and uploaded online. Fortunately, that's the kind of thing we like best around here. You want to see what it's really like, right? Of course you do. So let's check this shit out and finish it off once and for all. Starting the game up, you're immediately greeted with an ominous, chunky little song that serves to foreshadow the absolute clusterfuck you're getting yourself into. Press start, and with absolutely zero warning or explanation, you're tossed right into a dungeon and left to fend for yourself. This is one of those games where you really need to read the manual, and fortunately, as I mentioned before, it is available online, so let me give you the premise. You play as the programmer Akemi Nakajima, a brilliant but tormented student who is regularly bullied at his high school. One day, after being pushed a bit too far by fellow students Kyoko and Kondo, Nakajima kinda snaps and decides to start developing a demon summoning program to exact revenge on everyone who's wronged him. He even goes as far as offering up one of his teachers, Ohara, and a fellow classmate, Yumiko Shirasagi, as bait for the demon Loki to assist him with this task. Naturally, things go to hell pretty fast, and he ends up freeing Loki, the Egyptian god Set, and a host of other demons who are determined to regain their full power and conquer the real world. Loki has kidnapped Yumiko and Ohara and warped away to the demon world, and now it's up to Nakajima to get in there and kick some demon dick to save his friends and save the world from a demon invasion. Oh yeah, and Nakajima and Yumiko are also reincarnations of the Japanese deities Izanami and Izanagi. You got all that? It's a little different from the events of the novel, but it does share a lot more common ground with it than the Atlas game. At first glance, everything on this screen might be kinda confusing. You got all these bars, numbers, and text popping up, and it can be a lot to get used to. Let me show you how these work. The top left of the screen displays the name of the dungeon we're currently in. You start the game in Malkuth. Below that, we've got our moon phase indicator. As you probably know, moon phases are a Mega 10 series staple, and they do play a part in this game, affecting the strength of enemies, items, and some attacks depending on what phase you're in. The moon phase changes as you explore, just as with other games, but here, it's largely something that can be ignored unless you're near death or you really need to kill a boss. Then, you got a little number indicating which floor of the dungeon you're on. I'm going to talk a bit more about how dungeons are laid out in a second. Let's keep going with the HUD for now. So below that, you got a square that displays information relating to your gameplay. It'll say when you use an item, when you take damage, and other things like that, but the message you're going to be seeing more than any other is "be found." That shit appears constantly, and it's your clue that an enemy sees you and is coming to attack you. I've heard people say that "be found" is supposed to be a reference to Nakajima's social anxiety, and that's a neat idea, but I really think it's just a goofy translation of some Japanese that they put in English to look cooler. Who knows? Below the info box, you've got your inventory. Pretty self-explanatory. You can switch weapons here, equip potions, use keys, and it also shows a counter for how much money you've picked up. You'll find coins all over the place as you explore, and when you find a traveling merchant, these can be used to stock up on tools that you can store for later. The manual makes mention of items that can be combined in your inventory, something which initially led me to believe the game had a crafting system. This is actually only half true. Essentially, you can find modifiers for your weapons that can be freely equipped whenever you'd like. They might slow down an enemy, or do extra damage, and you can swap these out on the fly. Pretty cool. Finally, finishing off the left side of the screen, you got two more bars that at the moment are empty. These represent your ammo count for special weapons. Aside from your sword, you can find some shuriken type things, as well as a close range throwing weapon that the manual calls curved jewels. Moving over to the right side, you got that sexy Megami Tensei logo there, and then below that, this big ass symbol that looks like it's for decoration. This thing actually is an indicator of how your game is progressing. It starts off looking like this, and later changes once you've gained access to the demon summoning program in Cerberus, and finally changes again when you've rescued Yumiko. Sort of pointless, but a neat little touch nonetheless. Last but not least, you've got your health bar, and then another one called an information bar. According to the manual, by collecting items you can raise this bar and it allows you to receive more reliable hints. I still don't really understand this one, I'll be honest, but it sounds like it has some kind of impact on NPC dialogue that I just didn't notice. So, now that we know about all this crazy shit we're looking at, it's time to get cracking. As you start to explore Malkuth, you're going to run across a variety of weird enemies, like yellow piles of string, sentient pieces of raw meat, lobsters that shoot gumballs at you, and a lot of other unspeakable things that I can't describe. You can fire your weapons in 8 directions, and you're going to want to keep moving, because if an enemy gets too close to you, you're going to kick the bucket fast. You can fire straight ahead of you as you walk, but if you want to shoot diagonally, you have to stop and remain still, which can be a pain to get used to. When you start running into enemies that have projectiles, the game basically turns into a top-down tactical cover shooter, where positioning yourself in just the right spot to hit them while blocking their projectiles is key to surviving. As I previously said a handful of times, it's, well, clunky. The combat works, but it usually isn't that fun or exciting. Most enemies behave the same way. They'll either charge towards you or shoot projectiles at you. Even the extra weapons you find aren't that exciting. Essentially, the sword's the standard weapon, the shuriken is a long-range but weak weapon, and the jewels are close range and a bit stronger. Not much strategizing or variety going on here. Before too long, as you're wandering around, you'll either run into a staircase or a part of the map that opens up into another room. When I first played this game a year ago, I was under the impression that it was linear, and you were basically just working your way down to the end of the dungeon to complete the game. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. Your way forward is never immediately apparent, and the dungeons for the most part don't follow any real ordered sequence. Check it out. This thing right here is a map of every world in the game, and it shows you how they're all interconnected with each other. As you can see, Dungeon 1, Malkuth, is the only one that's off by itself with a linear path to Dungeon 2. From there on, you're going to be bouncing around, and you'll have multiple branching paths available to you at any given stage. Each of these stages consists of a total of 8 floors, and if that wasn't enough, you can also warp to a dark version of each one, for a total of over 160 floors to explore. As such, your goal is not just to reach the deepest floor, since there really isn't a definitive end, but rather to perform a series of tasks which can be located anywhere in this massive sprawl of a game. I was actually kind of surprised by this, because I didn't expect very much freedom in an arcade-style maze game like this. Things like fighting bosses, seeing cutscenes, and discovering items can be performed out of order if you so desire, and it can be a little confusing. To its credit, it really does kind of feel like an adventure since you're not just railroaded along a linear path, but it often ends up being more confusing than interesting, especially because the game only provides you with a broad map of how each dungeon's connected. For all of those 160 floors, you're on your own with figuring out where to go, so it's either draw one on paper or guess your way through it. Due to the non-linear nature of the game, individual playthroughs can look a lot different from each other, so I'm just going to explain things according to how mine went. So, after blowing through Malkuth, I got a cutscene which Nakajima holds his sword, the Hino Kagetsuchi, up to the sky and lets out a powerful yell about the power bestowed upon it by Izanami. Nice. The next stage, Yesod, is mostly more of the same but with a different color palette. One weird thing you can find in here is a shrine where you can interact with Izanami, who gives you some general hints about the game. She expresses the importance of finding and rescuing Cerberus, and also dishes out some weird cryptic advice, like how the light and dark are balanced, and that people who hoard money kinda suck. These are really just hints at game mechanics. The first is to hint that each world has a dark variant to it, and the other I guess is to encourage you to spend money on items? Speaking of spending money, let's check out the shop. After fighting our way out of Yesod past some really annoying projectile enemies, we end up in Hod, which is filled with hordes of quick enemies. On the second floor, I discovered a hole in the ground, and jumping down was met with this purple ghostly looking guy. I wouldn't blame you for just blasting him immediately because he looks like an enemy from afar, but if you get closer, he starts to sell you some shit. His inventory is randomized, and some of the stuff is pretty expensive, but you can get anything here, from weapons to keys to healing items and more. I tend to buy potions from him because if you don't know where to look, they can be few and far between. If you're tight on money, there's actually an exploit you can take advantage of, and a great place to do it is near the stairs on Hod's second floor. Each time you change floors, the contents of chests reset, and conveniently, there are 2 coin chests literally right next to the stairs. In just a few minutes, you can load yourself up on money and be ready to buy anything you want. Just be aware that the shopkeeper may disappear after a while, and you'll have to save your money for later when you find him again. Moving on, I entered Tiferet, a grassy forest-looking world filled with giant beetles. Here, I discovered the shuriken weapon in a chest, which actually looks more like a pentagram, but hey, it still works the same. As I mentioned earlier, this is a weak long-range weapon, so it's alright I guess, but it can't hurt to have an extra card up my sleeve. I also found a bell here and some health potions. I think the bells just attract monsters, I'm not really sure. I'd always use these when I'd find them, and nothing noticeable really happened, and I did test it multiple times in different locations. The manual seems to just say that it makes noise, so yeah, it's anyone's guess. I didn't spend much time in this world before discovering the next one, Netsock, where I came across an item that's a real game changer. In a chest is a big flame item that the manual refers to as the Salamander. This can be combined with any of your weapons, and it allows your shots to generate a huge explosion that stuns enemies for a few seconds. This shit is really overpowered. From here on, combat can be as cheesy as you want it to be, and you can start to just blow through floors a lot quicker. If you see a group of enemies and you don't want to fight them, just blast them with this and walk past. It's that easy. It's really a great item, so if you find yourself in this area, I highly recommend you look for this. From Netsock, I actually cut back through Tiferet and discovered another path to the ice world Bina. The intro to this world shows you a cutscene of an injured Nakajima, with narration text wondering if he'll be able to survive the demon world and save Yumiko. The icy caves of Bina are home to giant-ass goldfish, weird-looking mollusk motherfuckers, and I don't know, kangaroos? You really gotta use your imagination on these monsters. Bina is also a world through which you can access the center dungeon, Dot. Dot is one of a few places where you can switch over to the parallel dark worlds and explore those. Throughout this place, you can interact with these weird statue things of Yumiko. Like, you'll just be walking around and you'll find one standing there. Or you might even encounter two of them in the very same room. I call these statues because the game urges us to rescue Yumiko, yet she's just standing around down here, and aside from offering you a few bits of lore and hints, she doesn't do anything. The real Yumiko is actually imprisoned in a harder to reach location, so these are just here to encourage you along. Some of her tips mention your teacher Ohara and how she's fallen in love with Loki. She also mentions Set and insists naturally that we defeat them both. So, reach the end of Dot and you get this little cutscene of Ohara looking like she's in a Halloween costume with some cute little vampire teeth. She taunts us and refers to us as demon bait, and then you're back in Tiferet, except the music's changed, enemies are tougher, and the textures are a bit different. We're now in the parallel dark side of the dungeon. Walking around, you'll notice that these worlds have an abundance of locked gates, which require a key to open. Keys can be found all across the game, so it's a good idea to seek them out and stock up when you can. Many locked doors, unfortunately, are largely pointless and may guard a potion or sometimes literally nothing. Some, however, are required to complete the game and have bosses behind them, though you'll never know which one it's going to be until you use the key. Shit's tough like that. Besides that, the Dark Worlds are pretty much the same gameplay-wise. Explore, kill demons, and look for different paths to take. I passed back through Yesod and a whole lot of other dungeons before encountering Bina again, where I learned about a weird secret. Or maybe it's a glitch. If you're playing on a keyboard, depending on what emulator you use, you may make use of the function keys to access save states or adjust some graphics settings. While in this game, if you hold down the F1, F2, and F3 keys all at the same time, you can walk through walls. Yeah, this shit's apparently well known too, because it's one of the only things written down about this game on GameFAQs. Weird. So, as I explored Bina for the second time, I went down a new path and was met with a cutscene of the Demon Lord Set. He mocks you, wondering how you made it this far, and promises that your life is about to end. Then, you're dropped into Kether, a particularly hellish zone that feels about as climactic as you can get in this game. On the 8th floor, you'll find a locked door. Step in and holy shit, it's actually fucking him. I was really surprised by this. Like, it makes sense that there would be bosses in this game, but for hours I was just fighting the same old demons with little variation. This guy doesn't waste any more time with formalities either. He shoots lightning bolts at your ass fast, and you've really got to be on top of your game to dodge them. They deal a pretty high amount of damage, and it can be pretty tough to get close enough to properly fight him. I threw myself at this guy repeatedly, with very little success. Minutes turned into hours, and I was starting to wonder just how much health he had. No matter what I did or how long I lasted, he just would not go down. His health seemed infinite, and I started to wonder why that might be. Then it hit me. Way back at the start of the game, Izanami had mentioned that it would be really important to rescue Cerberus. I had never actually done that. And you know what, now that you mention it, I never found the demon summoning program either. Yeah, have you noticed when I move to different zones the screen just says no computer? I failed to find one of the most basic items in the game, and here I was challenging a late game boss. Shit. So, yeah. With no other option, I backed out of trying to fight Set, hoofed my ass all the way back to Dot, all the way back through the Light Worlds, and all the way back to Malkuth. And what do you know, the comp was right there, right where the game started, in a room directly to the left of where you first spawn in. I always just walked to the right, because, well, that's where the enemies are, that's where the stairs are, and it just felt natural to go that way. Now that's what I call a Megami Tensei moment. Well, with the computer and demon summoning program, not much really changes. When you reach a point where the stages switch, you can't access that same map from the manual that shows how the worlds link. You can also generate a password to continue your game later, which doesn't really matter because I'm emulating it, and you can view your entire inventory at once. So it's some quality of life stuff, but nothing crazy. The real purpose of the computer is of course to use Cerberus, but where in the fresh hell is he supposed to be? I returned to the shrine, but there were no useful hints. I wandered around aimlessly for a really long time, just searching floors for any sign of help, but I really just couldn't find anything. All of a sudden, while wandering Hod, I was suddenly warped to a small boxed-in room with a treasure chest inside of it, with basically no indication that you could do this. Inside of it, sure enough, was a little crest-looking thing with Cerberus on it. I had finally found this little bastard, and the side of the screen changed to reflect that. I mean, what the hell? I swear. I really swear they don't hint this to you. Maybe this is just another one of those things I overlooked. I know for a fact they outright tell you can do this in the PC-88 version of the game, which I played later, but I got no such thing when I played on the MSX. If any of you played this game, please, comment and let me know. I need validation that I'm not totally insane. So, okay, we have Cerberus. Basically what he does is give you invincibility. You can run into enemies to attack them, and you don't take any damage. You don't actually see him or anything, but you get a little bubble that flashes around you, so at least you know it's working. You can collect and buy dog bones scattered across the dungeons that'll give you more time to use Cerberus, as it is time limited to avoid being too overpowered. With this shit collected, I ran back through another 7,000 floors to get back to Kether, and this time, Set went down pretty quickly. When he dies, he drops an item called the Horus Key. In this little hole in the ground, you find Yumiko, who thanks you for helping her, and joins up with you. Nice. So we got the dog, we got the girl, but what now? Yet again, I was totally stumped. The hell else is there to do if we got everything we were looking for? Well, the last thing I could think of was Loki. Yeah, that smug little man was still running around out there, and we gotta find him. Now this took a while, but thankfully not as long as running back to the beginning to get Cerberus. Loki can be found in the dark version of Yesod on the first floor. Use a key on a locked door, step in, and there he is in all his giant blue glory. Sexy. He's a bit easier than Set, and I think the developers intended for you to fight him first. Funny how that ended up working out. He fires these big electric balls at you, and it's pretty similar, though I think they're a bit slower. Use your power-ups, potions, invincibility, and all that stuff to bring him down. When he dies, you just get shat back out in Tiferet yet again, except now there's a red crystal in your inventory. So, thanks. Well, according to the manual, this crystal is the secret to defeating the demon world. I started to wander around, hoping to find some kind of door or an exit to use this on, and I ended up finding something stranger. It was another boss, except I have no idea who this is. It's another human-sized person, just like Nakajima, and my best guess is that it's Ohara, but again, I'm not too sure. I mean, who else could it be, I guess? This boss is pretty annoying because it gets right up your ass and gives you very little room to breathe. Activating invincibility is a good way to get a second to think, but it's hard to close the distance and fight properly. Basically, you've either gotta slug it out and chug potions, or run with the boss right on your ass and turn around every so often to blast her. When you win, nothing really happens. Huh. Guess it's time to walk around more. I basically slowly crossed off my list of floors, carefully examining each one and then moving to the next. Painstaking to say the least. It turns out, the final place you need to go is a world called Chakma, but specifically, the normal version of it, not the evil one. On the 8th floor of Chakma, you find a little group of tiles that look different than any other in the game. It's here that you use that gem we got earlier. Set it down, and ahead a door opens. The only hint you get about this one is some random advice about placing a crystal from Izanami, but it doesn't say on what floor to place it, so you could very well be searching for this for hours. Enter the newly unlocked area, and it's Kether again, though this version of it looks a lot different than before. This is the final stretch of the game. Make your way through all 8 floors of this stage, and you'll end up at a series of locked doors. Hope you have a handful of keys with you. Behind them is Yamotsu Shikome, a character from the novel, and this is the last challenge of the game. This demon is still, in my opinion, easier than Set. It shoots giant yellow balls at you, but most of the time they go diagonally, so take advantage of that and just wail on her. After a few minutes of slugging it out, the final boss of Telenet Megami Tensei goes down, and you're free to proceed to a shrine at the end of a hallway. Touch it, and that's it. You're treated to a cutscene of Nakajima and Yumiko standing together, overlooking a nice red and blue sky, and the text, "The fight is over," appears on the screen with some triumphant music. And yes, that's all you get. You know what? This game's some shit. It's extremely cryptic, clunky, and flawed. I can't say I recommend a full playthrough, but it did end up surprising me with the design behind its worlds, the variety of strange secrets to uncover, and of course, the goofy little cutscenes you can find in each world. While it's far from the greatest adaptation of the Digital Devil story novel, it does offer up some interesting concepts, and I can respect that. It's a pretty neat little piece of history, and I'm glad I gave it a second run. Of course, that might just be the insanity talking. Now, there's also the matter of the PC-88 version of the game. Let's take a look at that for a minute. In my original video, I said that this was the better version, and that's true. The gameplay feels more fluid, the monsters and NPCs benefit from much improved graphics, and the music gets a little bit of a boost too. The cutscenes are also much better, and even a little creepier. When you check out those Izanami shrines, for example, she starts off as this decayed corpse, but gradually regains her human form as you progress. They also threw in a topless scene when you rescue Yumiko. Huh. And check out this ending, I mean, come on, that's cute. What a nice little graphic to end things off with. Aside from these graphical changes, not much is different mechanics-wise. The worlds are largely the exact same with nearly identical layouts, so not much would have been different if I focused on this one instead. I was intrigued by the MSX version because I couldn't find any clips of its ending online, so I wanted to uncover that one for myself and see what it was like. Unless you're interested in playing the game in its earliest iteration, I'd easily suggest the PC-88 version over it. So, with those games out of the way, there's only one thing we have left to do on this channel before we're finally done with Akemi Nakajima. Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei. As I mentioned earlier, Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei is a compilation of 2 games on the same cartridge, remade versions of Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei as it was released on the Famicom, and its sequel, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei II. These are the earliest entries in the series created by Atlus, and as you likely know are first-person dungeon crawlers that resemble modern entries in the series, with familiar features like demon fusion and negotiation. The first Megami Tensei was a bit of a trial by fire for me a year ago. I was still new to the franchise's older entries, and I was surprised by some of the game's mechanics, such as how hard it was to cure your party of status effects, the inconvenience of fusing demons due to there being only one location in the entire game to do so, and the difficulty of some of its mid-game dungeons. Kyuuyaku aims to repaint the original Megami Tensei experience to feel more like its Shin Megami Tensei successors, and today, we're going to see how the changes measure up, and if it's worthy of being played in the present. Let's do it. The opening cutscene presents us with the same old story, though naturally it's a little different than Telenet. If you've been on my channel before, you've definitely heard this at least once already. Nakajima invents the demon summoning program to get back at some bullies, and the demons Loki and Set break free. Luckily, transfer student Yumiko Shirasagi saves them from being devoured in the nick of time. Working as a team, the two fight against the absolute shitstorm unraveled by Nakajima, but the demons aren't letting up, and their leader Lucifer is working on a full-scale invasion. It's up to us to explore a giant labyrinth that's appeared in Asuka, kick some ass, revive the Japanese goddess Izanami and receive her blessing, and take out Lucifer once and for all. After this little intro, you can name your party, but if you use any names other than Nakajima and Yumiko, I mean really, what the fuck are you doing? Then, just like the original, you get to distribute stats for each character. Nakajima relies on physical attack, so pump all of his points into vitality, strength, and speed. Maybe a little luck if you're that kind of person. Yumiko is our magic caster, so you'll want to level up intellect, as well as the usual vitality and speed. Once you've decided your starting stats, the game begins. So, here we are. It's had a bit of a facelift, but it's still that dark, murky hellhole we all know and love. We're in Mikon City on the 8th floor of Daedalus Tower, and our first task is, as always, to get to the bottom and kill the Minotaur. As we get a feel for our surroundings, players familiar with the original game are quickly going to notice a few changes. For one thing, we get a map now. Aside from a mini-map spell, this was not present in the original release, so you either had to memorize each floor or draw a map for yourself on some paper. Nice. Definitely makes exploring a bit easier. You also get a neat little map of the labyrinth as a whole, and it shows where you are in the dungeon relative to other locations. Not hugely useful, but pretty cool for explaining how everything's linked together. Also, you can save your game now. I know, crazy shit, right? The original was a Famicom game from 1987, so it made you use a password if you wanted to resume your progress later. It goes without saying that this is a welcome change. Around the city you'll find all the same shops as before. Weapons, armor, a place to heal your party, and a place to fuse demons. To be honest, I feel pretty mixed on the graphical changes made to this version. This might be something a lot of you disagree with, and I'm interested in hearing what you guys think. While the dungeon crawling is a little easier on the eyes than the original, I feel like this comes at the cost of a lot of the game's charm. The goofy 8-bit anime portraits have been removed, the HUD, which used to change colors with every dungeon, is just a generic black now, and the shop backgrounds, which used to have some weird-ass otherworldly colors going on, are now a lot more plain. I'm also kind of mixed on the color palettes for some of the dungeons, though I'll admit that's a nitpick. Daedalus is a neat dark blue dungeon in every other iteration of this game, and here it's kind of just generic stone walls. The NPC and monster graphics are better though for the most part. Also, the music. It's still amazing, though for most of the tracks, I actually prefer the NES versions. It's like the updated versions lack some kind of depth that the originals had. I'm not well versed in music terminology, but to me, the tracks just sound flatter than before. This is especially apparent in Megami Tensei II, which we'll talk about in a bit. For its original Famicom release, that game had a special sound chip inside of its cartridge, and it made the soundtrack really stand out. The SNES version is definitely a downgrade there. While some of these design decisions are a mixed bag, one place this game shines is in its mechanical improvements. Let's take a look. To beat Minotaur and move on to the next zone, we gotta fight some demons, get some money, equip ourselves with weapons and armor, and raise a team of demons. Before you even leave the city, be sure you buy a weapon or you're gonna get your shit kicked in. Combat in Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei is simple, though it offers the slightest bit of extra depth than the original. When a demon appears, you have the option of fighting, escaping, negotiating, or setting the battle to auto, your typical stuff. Fighting allows you to perform physical and magical attacks depending on the character, and with Nakajima, you can use your comp to switch recruited demons in and out of battle. You can also gather a selection of items to use in battle. The Famicom version didn't actually have items aside from health restoring beads, so this adds a small but appreciable level of strategy to your encounters. You can find items that deal elemental damage, stuff that heals status effects or revives party members, and more. I loved the addition of items, it was something that the original really could have used. Being able to heal paralysis on a demon without relying on a spell or walking all the way back to the town is really nice. Negotiation works just the same as always, and it's about the same as before. None of the dialogues are really that interesting or varied aside from a handful, but it fulfills its purpose adequately, and the RNG of successfully getting a demon never really felt that unfair. When you get demons, you can move their position in the party to protect some of your more valuable members. Moving people to the top increases their chances of getting hit, with the ones in the back usually taking less of a beating. One thing I noticed was that the escape function often felt totally useless. Even if my level far exceeded the demons I was facing and my speed stat was leveled up, the success rate always seemed pitifully low. Might just be bad luck, but I thought it was worth mentioning. A lot of numbers have also been adjusted, with enemy HP and damage outputs being balanced out to be less spongy and annoying. Some may not like this change. Personally, I think it's fine. Combat feels a bit more fluid, and it's just less of a slog overall. As you work your way down Daedalus, repeated trips back to Mika to fuse demons, get full sets of armor, and of course save your game are important. For Minotaur, you really just want to have a full squad. It doesn't matter exactly who they are, as long as they can hold their own for a couple turns and contribute some damage. On the lower floors, you're likely to find Cerberus, who is pretty overpowered for this section of the game, having over 100 health. Definitely pick this guy up. He makes a lot of the following floors and even parts of the next dungeon much easier. An interesting thing you can find on the third floor is a junk shop, where you can get status curing items as well as HP and MP restoratives. This can potentially save you a trip back if you got the money for it. At this point, you've also probably run into some elevators that are locked. These will be available to use once we take out the boss. Coming down to the first floor, you're met with a wide open space. Minotaur is found inside of a series of dark rooms. Before heading in, be sure you've got a fully healed team and have as much MP as possible to offset his damage. Minotaur basically just hits you with a group attack repeatedly, and it's just a test of how long you can endure this while whittling him down. It's not that hard if you're prepared, so just wail on him for a bit and he'll go down. When he dies, he drops the Orb of Silence, and then you're free to use the dungeon's elevators to head back up to the city and regenerate. Before moving on to the next dungeon, there are a few things you can take advantage of with the newly opened elevators. On the 3rd floor, you can encounter the demon Bug, who drops a pretty high amount of XP at the level we're at right now. This is cool for grinding out a couple of quick extra levels if you're interested. There's also a pretty important item we can get right behind Bug, but for now we have to advance further to make it spawn. Explore the rest of Daedalus' bottom floor and you'll come across a door leading to the Valhalla corridor. There are some shops available in this area, so if you can afford it, make some upgrades to your equipment. We're gonna come back here later. This part of Valhalla corridor is essentially an airlock to the Sky City, which is where we should go first. It's just a few steps ahead. There are 2 doors to the Sky City, each guarded by some gatekeeping motherfuckers. One is an old-ass man who absolutely refuses to let you in, but the other is a younger guy who's more easily persuaded. He mentions that a sneaky goblin stole his shield, and that if we can get it back, he'll let us pass. That shield happens to be lying in a little treasure trove near the Daedalus' 3rd floor elevator. Jog back there, grab it, bring it back, and we're in. So, bien, the Sky City. Looks a lot more desolate and depressing than the original, which makes sense considering the demon Medusa moved in and made the top floor of the place her statue dungeon. We gotta solve this problem if we want to be strong enough to take on Loki and Valhalla, so let's get to it. First order of business is to find the Tabasa statue, which will seal Medusa's petrification power and make her fight a lot easier. This place isn't too tough to explore, though it does have a handful of pitfall and damage tiles to watch out for. One annoying trend that I especially started to notice in this dungeon is encounters with like 7 or 8 enemies. A lot of the time these guys are physically weak and go down quickly, but when it's every other encounter, it gets old fast. These can easily wear your party down and force trips back to the healing spring, which I guess is challenging, but it's just not that fun. There's nothing really exciting about the game saying, hey, here's that same group of 8 enemies over and over again. If you have problems with this, you might want to try using Yumiko's fire spells. Those things can really pack a punch if you've been stacking points into intellect, and while you are burning through MP to do it, at least it ensures you can speed through encounters and gather XP faster. Eventually, you'll come across the statue we need on floor 2. Don't miss a key from some old dude in a track jacket on the 1st floor as well. You also might come across these big locked gates that lead to a recreation area. This is likely going to be the town you use the most for the rest of the game, but for now, it's locked. With all this shit, it's time to head to the top and fight Medusa. Really, not that much prep is required for this battle. As long as you have the statue, it's a lot like Minotaur. Just slap each other until one of you dies. If you can manage to fuse a demon with a group healing spell like Baku, that'll go a long way in ensuring your survivability. Aside from that, just about any demons you pick up along the way will do for getting through this. If you got some tough ones like Cerberus still, they'll do well in your front positions, and then Yumiko can just hang back and heal. Soon enough, she'll go down, drop the Taurus key, and then things are pretty much back to normal at Sky City. The recreation area is also back in business, and now it's actually a lot more useful than the original game. Aside from healing, you can now fuse demons here. Thank God. All those walks back to Daedalus to fuse were a huge pain in the ass before. Also, casino games. Yeah, that's like the biggest change you're gonna notice. We got slots and card games for you to blow your hard-earned demonic dollars on. These can actually be pretty helpful, but considering the nature of gambling, it's literally all luck. A lot of the late game armors are pretty pricey, and this gives you an alternate method of gathering a lot of money. Just be careful you don't lose it all. Near one of the town's entrances, you'll find the now functioning elevators, and one room next to that which houses the captain. Yeah, the Sky City's drivable, remember? So with this, you can park the place at different sections of the game, making it a sort of massive mobile base. Pretty neat. Our next stop actually doesn't require us to fly anywhere just yet. Following the proper order of things, we gotta backtrack to the Valhalla corridor and take out Loki. But for the hell of it, I did decide to check out the Mazurka corridor, just to see if I could take on a few enemies and get some fast level ups. A year ago, I had a lot to say about Mazurka and its basement dungeon, the Rotting Sea of Flames. I always felt underleveled while I explored, and the amount of XP dropped by enemies just seemed pitiful. So I spent a great deal of time in this dungeon grinding away so I could speed through the huge amount of random encounters faster. There is a pretty simple way of circumventing this though, if you're so inclined to raise your level like I am. Just fight enemies from future dungeons. It might be a little trial and error, you'll probably die a couple times, but well, it works, and because the level difference between you and these demons is so big, you'll gain levels very quickly. You might think this sounds like cheesing the game and making it overly easy, but even after gaining 5 or 6 levels here in Mazurka, Loki was still fairly challenging, so it's still plenty fair. Having a few extra points of MP is always a great thing, and it just reduces time wasted heading back to town to restore it. Now, there are still some pretty terrible things to look out for if you decide to hop around to the later dungeons like this. For example, Mazurka is the first place you run into some of the fuckiest people in the entire game. Loa and Vampire. These evil little shits can use a move that permanently decreases your level, which is pretty demotivating and does nothing but take away precious moments of your life that you'll never get back. Of course, it's not the end of the world, but it does suck, so just try to avoid these or kill them quickly. We'll come back here in a bit to experience Mazurka in all its complete glory, but for now, let's dip back into Valhalla. Rather than a lot of floors to figure out, Valhalla just has a couple of massive ones to make your way through. There are a few really important things to do here that are required to complete the game, so we're going to knock all those out so we don't have to come back here again later. First, you're going to want to talk to this young gatekeeper again and grab the Lore's Talisman. This will help you seal Loki's magic, limiting his moveset. Nice. As you explore, you'll hear a rumor on the lips of the beings wandering Valhalla. Some kind of shopkeeper named Rag. Well, just like before, we're going to need to find his little goblin ass if we want to complete the game. You can find Rag on the first floor of the dungeon, and he's got a bit of a facelift. Instead of a shades-wearing asshole, this time, Rag is a muscular blue guy with 3 eyes. Huh. So, it's the same as you might remember. To shop at Rag's, you need amethysts, then you can have a look at his exclusive merchandise. 2 items he sells are required to progress later, so you're gonna have to make 2 trips to the gem pile hidden in this dungeon to get them. The items you want are the Ares necklace and the Jewel of Heaven. After that, you can basically forget about Rag for good. The Dragon Whisker just heals you, and the Thunderbolt, well, electrocutes you. He sells an item later called the London Boots that teleports you back to Daedalus, but unless you're feeling really nostalgic for Econ City, it's kinda pointless. My old playthrough kinda made me hate Rag because of those items he carries. I'd rather required items be just, located in the dungeon in a treasure chest somewhere, or drop through a challenging encounter. I guess trading for shit to get by is kinda neat, but it's also pretty cryptic and I can see people easily missing this. Also, he literally sells you a fucking electric shock. Anyway, one thing that really blew my balls while playing this dungeon is a room where this guy says, "This is the entrance to hell." I mean, hello? Is it really? This dungeon wasn't in the original game, so I was pretty excited to see what this was going to be like, considering there's already a dungeon that's a flame pit filled with demons. Well, it's a green cave. Okay. Yeah, so this is a little optional place you can access if you have Cerberus in your party. Hell is essentially a compact, confusing little place where you can do a short side quest in which you deliver Cerberus to the end of it, and then he stays behind to fight demons and close the interdimensional rift. Most of the enemies here are weak, so it's really just a matter of trial and error on some of these doors until you find the right one. There's also a healer in here if you get really lost. That's basically all there is to know about the place. You can probably beat it in like 10 minutes. I think the little bit of added lore about Cerberus staying behind to literally keep Hell closed is neat, but it's mostly just a mediocre area aside from that. So we got the shit from Rag, we shut the lid on Hell. All that's left before the boss is our old friend Rick. Yeah, this little demon guy chained to the wall in the basement, Rick. If you set him free, he gives you a bracelet, and you're gonna need this right before the game ends, so we might as well grab it now. He'll also join your party if you have space for him, but I didn't, so he vanished into the night forever. Thanks, Rick. Alright, Loki, the big boy himself. Provided we've got the Lore's Talisman, he just smacks you repeatedly, and that's it. No magic or status effects to worry about, it's just another damage race. Essentially the exact same as the past 2 bosses with higher damage values. Now that I think about it, that's basically the gimmick with every boss in this game. You find an item and all they can do is hit you with a physical attack. Maybe I should have tried to play through without that shit to spice it up a little. Anyway, the strategy's the same as ever, though if you have Hama spells, they actually seem to do some decent damage to him. So if you got the MP for that, spam your strongest ones with Yumiko and he'll go down even faster. Alran is a pretty solid demon that you can fuse with a group heal spell to offset the damage from Loki. So if you have her and Yumiko, you should be fine just recruiting some other random ones before the fight. When Loki's defeated, he drops the Orb of Malice, and then we're all clear to continue on to Mazurka again. Before going here, I decided to ramp up my level a bit more by jumping ahead to Infinity Palace, which is the final dungeon of the game where Lucifer is. Believe it or not, a lot of the enemies in here are fairly weak, especially to Hama attacks. So if you stop here, you can grind out tons of levels very quickly. I was mostly interested in fusing some powerful demons so I could try out more spells, so after gaining a handful of levels, I recruited some guys back in Valhalla on the Sky City and set out to fusing. I managed to make some pretty good stuff too, like Chimera and everyone's favorite, Kyuuyaku. With a pretty solid team to support me, I decided to venture into Mazurka and see what it had to offer. Mazurka is another big dungeon with over 8 floors if you count the inflamed demon basement. The encounters here felt especially grueling, with hordes of succubi, sometimes 8 at a time, over and over and over again. Even with decent demons, this gets old fast. Like I said before, there's nothing fun about it. I'd rather face some of those level decreasing guys than massive demon hordes because at least there's like something to worry about or a slight layer of strategy to it. This dungeon is also filled with doors that lead to empty rooms, something which I'm sure is frustrating to completionists. You've also got another scavenger hunt here to take care of. First, we're going to want to track down Gaia, someone that NPCs mention loves dark places. After a lot of up and down on the staircases and endless encounters, sure enough, you'll find them in a dark room on the 8th floor. This guy offers you an item called the Silver Relief, which is necessary to open the way to this dungeon's boss. Of course, to get it, you have to give him all of your money. Shit. Well, it's kind of important if you want to beat the boss, so you might as well do it. With all the encounters, you'll make it back before long. The next thing we need is a statue item a bit further down. There's a rags shop and some equipment shops on the 6th floor if you need them, so keep an eye out for those too. On the 5th floor, you'll come across a room with a Lado statue, but it's sitting on a trap, so you have to do some Indiana Jones type shit where you quickly switch the items to avoid setting it off. This is where that Ares necklace comes in. Place it on the pedestal and the statue is yours. Nice. Well, the boss, Hecate, is just a bit further on the 3rd floor. Hecate used to look kinda goofy, so I do appreciate her redesign for this game. It's a lot more threatening at least. Also, she kinda looks like Rag's sister. As always, it's a slap fight. Hit her harder than she hits you, and heal to offset the damage. Easy enough. When she dies, you get the Orb of Resolve, so that's pretty cool at least. From here, we gotta go deeper, to what is without a doubt, the coolest area of the game. In the lowest depths of Mazurka is the rotting sea of flames, which just looks sick as hell. I mean, come on, the fire on the walls moves, and the music is still awesome. The challenge of this area is that since you're walking through fire, you constantly lose health as you explore, so you're going to want to seek out Izanami, who's imprisoned here, as quickly as possible so she can help you out with that. Because of the design and music of this dungeon, I just can't help but enjoy it. I know in my old playthrough of this game I had a lot of trouble with it because I camped out here for hours and grinded my dick off, but I didn't run into that issue this time around, and I'm glad because it's actually a pretty neat place. There are a few interesting things to find down here. First, you can find an injured knight that asks you to cure his paralysis. Help him out and he'll heal your whole party. Not hugely important, but this kind of thing is cool. I wish this game had more of these kinds of encounters, because they make the areas feel a little more dangerous and alive. You can also find your usual shops, including get another rags if you've gone this far without getting the Jewel of Heaven. Keep exploring and eventually you'll reach the 2nd basement, where after doing a few teleportation tiles, you'll reach the chamber where Izanami's trapped. This part of the game is a little goofy, and if you've seen the original before, you know exactly why. So, Izanami's held in this coffin mask prison thing, and you have to put the orbs we've found throughout the game into the mask in the proper order to free her. Do it wrong and you're kicked out of the room for a while before you can try again. In the original version of the game, it literally replayed the opening cutscene to the game and started you all the way back in Daedalus if you got it wrong, which sucks shit, so at least we aren't that barbaric anymore. I'm pretty sure some NPCs hint at this, but the Orb of Malice goes in the forehead, the Orb of Silence goes in the right eye, and the Orb of Resolve goes in the left eye. I can only imagine what it was like back in the 80s when some kid got sent back to the start of the game. That would probably be enough to turn me into a career criminal. Anyway, after Izanami's free, she gives you a robe that protects you from the dungeon's fire, so you can explore the place without taking any extra damage. From here, there's a couple more things we need to do before we're done. First, you're going to want to find this horse demon Persky on the 2nd floor. Take him out and you get Persky's Neigh, which makes the boss of this dungeon set a little bit easier. Of course, if you're tired of boring slap fights, I guess you could just skip out on this. Nearby on the first floor, we need to pick up this little demon named Ruth, who lives in a bottle. Ruth lets us know whenever hidden doors are nearby, which is necessary for getting to the boss, and also a bonus item after this dungeon. Keep that in mind for a bit. So, you got the bottle, you got the nay, let's go beat the shit out of a snake. He's pretty strong, so be sure you come in here with a solid team. You can probably manage with recruited demons, but I'd suggest fusing a few specifically for the fight with healing moves and high pools of health. It'll just go by a lot easier that way. It is just another back and forth slap fight, but he does hit hard, so keep an eye on your health and keep Yumiko alive at all costs. The Persky's Nay sometimes forces Set to waste a turn. If you get these wasted turns, take it as an opportunity to top off your health. Just keep hitting him and eventually you'll make it through. After he's done, you get the Lion's Shield, which is the best shield in the game, so be sure to equip it. Nice. All that's left is one final dungeon in the grand finale with Lucifer. Before you go, there are a couple of preparations to make back at Sky City. One of them is the Hino Kagetsuchi, which is optional, but I recommend it. The Hino Kagetsuchi is the strongest sword in the game, and the path to it can be found on the 4th floor of the city. At the top, Ruth will notify you of a hidden door in an otherwise empty room, and then you just need to navigate a room full of pitfalls, where you'll need to drop down the correct one and then find a staircase which leads to the coveted sword. There's gonna be some trial and error in doing this, unless you look at a map, but I think it's worth it. This sword can hit twice in one turn, and does very high damage, making most encounters a joke. It'll also make Lucifer go down a lot faster. After this, you want to start finalizing your party. It's best to have demons mostly above level 50. Thor, Kali, Anubis, and Chimera were good enough for me to get through, but there are some even stronger ones you can get if you're up for it. Demons with Tarukaja to buff your attack are a great choice, as well as the usual healing spells. A few casts of Tarukaja with the Hino Kagetsuchi is a great recipe to pump out hundreds of damage per turn on the final boss. Infamy is fairly large, but it doesn't have that many annoying gimmicks except for one forced backtracking section that sucks. You'll find some NPCs that tell you about a white dragon orb, which you need or else Lucifer's magic is unsealed and he can cast a full heal on himself whenever he wants. That stupid ass orb is all the way back in the rotting sea of flames, and no, you can't just grab it before you come here. You gotta talk to this stupid skeleton first, then you can go all the way back, retrace your old steps, and find the orb in some pot in a hidden room. And it's not even near an elevator or anything, you kinda have to go out of your way to find it. I wish this was just inside Infinity Palace. It's pretty cryptic and annoying, but whatever. That's the last scavenger hunt item we need for the game, provided you grabbed everything else. Thank God. So, back at Infinity again, you can start to finish the dungeon. There are some shops here that sell mega expensive armor, though it is pretty strong, so you might consider buying it. On some of the lower floors you can find some shit that's even better, so you can also just go look for that. I was using armor from a couple dungeons ago and I managed to survive, and I wasn't really over leveled, somewhere in the high 50s, so I don't think it's all that important. As you make your way down, you'll reach a section of the dungeon where everything turns red. This is basically the home stretch. You've got some floors here where a majority of it is dark, and a couple with some teleports that can trip you up, but aside from that, it's no sweat. I'm pretty sure there was a floor in the Famicom version that was nearly all dark that was a huge pain in the ass, but I swear it wasn't in this version, or they shrunk it or something. The 8th floor of the Red Tower is your final stop. Here, you get a little optional gauntlet of mini-bosses and of course, Lucifer himself. Stopping you at the door is a boss called Fog, which in the original game was literally nothing, like a totally blank sprite, just empty space. I'm glad they actually gave this guy a physical form though. He's kind of a joke, but hey, I appreciate the improvement. Inside you can take on the rest. First is Beelzebub, who is also a blank sprite in the original game. Now he's just a little fly. This shit's pretty hilarious, because it does the damage of a normal demon, so it must be one strong ass fly. I mean, it is the king of hell, but come on, just hit it with a rolled up newspaper and move on. You've also got Nu, who is treated as some kind of special encounter for some inexplicable reason. He's just a low level demon. Hit him, and that's it. Cool. You know what? This shit's too easy. Let's just fight Lucifer. So, be mindful of some pitfall traps on this floor and head to the north side of the room. Be sure your team's all healed up, you have as much MP as possible, and head in. Lucifer's design is a lot more human than the Famicom version, and it looks pretty great. He mocks you a little bit, but you hold up the white dragon orb to seal his healing, and then the fight is on. Well, this is it. We're finally at the end of like 3 playthroughs of this game, maybe 5 if you count the Telenet games. Akemi Nakajima has consumed hundreds of hours of my life, and it's time to finally put this stuff to rest. Let's do it. Lucifer's tough. He's got a lot of health, he hits hard, and he can freeze you with an ice spell. He's also got a curse attack that has a low chance of killing you instantly. Even with high level demons, his physical attack was taking off over 100 per hit, sometimes even 200. Despite the intimidating damage, he's still manageable. Have a dedicated healer, and be sure to cast Tarukaja multiple times to maximize your damage output. Nakajima should be using the Hino Kagetsuchi every turn unless you need him to use a healing item in an absolute emergency. It's pretty important to stay as consistent as possible with that damage. I honestly prefer when Lucifer uses that curse move because it often fails and gives you a free turn to figure things out. Considering it's the final boss, this is the guy with the most health by far, so any chance you can get to deal some free damage is great. At the end of the day, it's mostly just another back and forth slap fight. There's not much you can do in terms of element weaknesses or something like that. Once you got your buff set up, just keep everyone alive for as long as you can. Do your best, and Lucifer goes down. His dying words warn you that things aren't over and that someone else has been pulling the strings the entire time. The dungeon starts to collapse, and your team makes a dash for the exit. It's finally over. All you have left to do now is enjoy the credits. Well, it was really interesting playing this game again. Do I think it's better than the original? My answer to that's actually probably another question. What do you want out of the game? Now I know, that probably sounds like a cop-out, but bear with me. If you like the idea of really toughing it out, drawing your own maps and experiencing the birth of a franchise in all its goofy, clunky glory, then you should play the original. If you think using notebook paper to explore a video game in 2021 sounds stupid, and you'd just like to explore an easily accessible, smoothed out version of that same game, play Kyuuyaku Megami Tensei. Let's face it, today, no matter which version of Megami Tensei you play, it's going to be a downgrade from the modern standard. When picking your favorite version, it's just going to come down to how deep you want to invest yourself into it. The original is a bigger time investment because it holds your hand much less, but this one is much more fluid and feels better to play overall. Personally, I like a lot of the changes made to Kyuuyaku, but I think it does lose a lot of the awkward charm of the original. Maybe that's a complicated answer, but I found it pretty difficult to choose one over the other. As the credits draw to a close, we see that Nakajima apparently made his adventure into a video game, as a desktop computer shows some guy standing around in a dungeon. Then, wait, what the fuck? Are you... what? Yeah, that's right. As soon as you beat the first Megami Tensei, the second one starts right up as a nuclear missile ends the age of mankind. Yeah, nice job trudging through all those dungeons. It meant nothing because the world just got nuked. Fucker. I mean, wow. Okay. I'm not going to do a full playthrough of the game in this video because it's again very similar to the original, and I already did a video on that too, but I will talk about a few changes I think are interesting. If you really want me to do a complete video on Kyuuyaku 2, leave a comment. Maybe I'll consider it. Anyway, as I mentioned before, the music is probably the worst part about this game. Now don't get me wrong, it's great, but the Famicom version was like perfection in audio form. The game's special sound chip made it have very impressive quality, and I don't think this remake does it total justice. The graphics again are much improved. The wasteland overworld looks great this time around instead of just a wide open desert. I think Megami Tensei II benefits much more from graphical improvements than the first. This is a game with many more varied environments, characters, and an actual plot that goes beyond one paragraph, so it's great for immersion. There are some weird changes that I think are kind of boring though, like replacing the goofy totem pole guy that saves your game with a computer. Also, this game gets a map screen too, which is another great quality of life improvement if that's what you're into. I've already expressed how great this game is in my Megami Tensei 2 video, but I'll restate it here. If you're into the newer Shin Megami Tensei games and you want to try something older, seriously consider this one. This is where they really started to get a hold of the series formula, and I think this version of the game is a great testament to that. Overall, to sum it up, I'd say I'm mixed on the first half of Kyuuyaku, but pretty much sold on the second. Shit, we looked at a lot of games today. Well, I think that about sums up my thoughts on the Digital Devil story games, meaning I can finally close the book on this chapter of the franchise. Unless, of course, someone digs up another ROM of a flip phone game or some crazy shit like that. Who am I kidding? I'll probably play this again next week. Hope you guys enjoyed this little adventure. It was a lot of fun revisiting these games with a fresh perspective, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on them. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next video.